Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're looking at a video from Revelation TV. You might remember these guys as being the two medical doctors who are essentially walking proof that you don't have to be good at science to get an advanced degree that gives you the ability to call yourself a doctor, which actually makes it all the more pathetic when you consider certain creationists that have to purchase fake degrees from diploma mills. Anywho, their video is long, so I will be skipping about quite a bit, so let's go!
But today, fossils have been used for a long time, haven't they, to prove the point in lots of ways for the evolutionists, actually.
Yes, they have. But it bears mentioning, as I do in most of my videos that deal with fossils, that the fossil record is one of the weakest lines of evidence for evolution. It does certainly contain some very good evidence, but just because of how rare the fossilization process is, the record is necessarily spotty. And actually, this spottiness is a point in favor of the Earth being ancient. If all the fossils were formed in Noah's flood, you would expect there to be a pretty well perfect representation of every species in the fossil record. But there isn't. It's almost as if it were a rare process that has been happening over billions of years.
Yeah. And what you're hopefully going to do today is to and show how they can be misinterpreted.
Yes, I have absolutely zero doubt whatsoever in my mind that Richard here is going to do a phenomenal job of misinterpreting the fossil evidence.
One of the things I always talk about is fossils, so I thought I would attack fossils in the first half of this program and Darwin's Finches, which is the basis of evolution, in the second half of the program.
Darwin's finches are not the basis of evolution. What they are an excellent example of natural selection and adaptation. The Galapagos Islands are a great place to study evolution because the islands are just far enough away to cause reproductive isolation, but are just close enough together that occasionally there is some crossover between the islands. So you can see the different strategies that have evolved in closely related organisms to deal with these slightly different environments. Now, I have a bit of a confession to make. I usually avoid videos talking about Darwin's finches because, as fascinating as they are, the evolution versus creation debate with the finches is really quite boring. On the evolution side, we say that it's an excellent demonstration of natural selection and adaptation. On the creationist side, they usually say it's an excellent demonstration of natural selection and adaptation. But they're still birds, though! So it usually ends up being a case where everybody agrees about what's happening, but the creationists refuse to even look at the bigger picture, so it doesn't exactly make for riveting content. But while I have yet to watch this video all the way through, I feel like these two will manage to muck it up in a more interesting way.
Hello, my name is Richard Kent. Today I want to talk about fossils. Now, evolutionists love to talk about fossils. Now, I want to tell you straight away that they're wrong.
That's a nice little bit of poisoning the well. Don't worry about listening to the evolution side of things, because they're wrong. Just listen to me.
Fossils do not form over thousands or even millions of years.
Okay, so here I would like to go into a technicality that I rarely touch on, because it's usually just irrelevant. Technically speaking, a fossil is simply the remains of an organism or traces of that organism from a past geologic age. It does not mean the bone has been replaced by minerals. It does not mean that the remains have gone through any specific chemical process for preservation. It just means that it is an organism or markings that an organism made that are at least 10,000 years old. Typically, for a bone to survive that long, it would have to have been permineralized, which is the process in which minerals that are dissolved in water penetrate the pores of the bones or whatever is being preserved, and then as the water evaporates, it leaves behind whatever minerals it may have been carrying. So over time, the organic matter breaks down and is replaced with minerals. Permineralization does not necessarily take a long time, though it does take longer than the creationists like to claim when they show things like petrified wood. The petrified wood and whatnot that they like to show off is likely only partially permineralized. They usually don't let us examine them for obvious reasons. But it wouldn't matter even if it were fully permineralized, because what makes something a fossil is not the degree of permineralization, but the age. It is not a fossil unless it's from the end of the Pleistocene or earlier.
During World War I, on the battlefields of Belgium and France, there were 12 million soldiers killed. You will not find a single fossilized soldier there.
Nope. you won't, because World War I was not 10,000 years ago. Permineralized? I would be surprised if there were completely permineralized remains of a soldier that died so recently, but it is entirely possible that some partially permineralized remains are out there somewhere that we just haven't found. I mean, we as humans have been pretty good at recovering our dead bodies for disposal, so as it is considered to be extremely rude to dig up graves out of curiosity, we don't exactly have a whole lot of instances of bodies being naturally buried and undisturbed that we can go check on. But this speaks to the mistaken idea that creationists often have, that the fossilization process stopped sometime in the past because we don't see fossils being made today, which, of course, flies in the face of their usually adjacent point about there being petrified boots and hats and whatnot. And, of course, the assumption that we don't see fossils being made today is based on entirely faulty reasoning. In order to be certain that fossils are not currently forming, we would have to track every single organism on the planet and see what happens to it when it dies. The fact of the matter is that events that lead to rapid burial are relatively common, and while rapid burial does not guarantee permineralization, it is the first step in the process.
You'll find lots of bayonets and helmets and bullets, but you won't find a fossilized soldier.
Dying in a war is not really conducive to the permineralization process. Firstly, a soldier who dies in battle is probably not going to be immediately buried. Their body will be exposed on the surface. Secondly, people tend to go through areas that have had battles fought and collected the bodies to be properly disposed of according to their cultures and customs, which actually is often to bury them. So it is entirely possible that at least some of them are in the process of becoming permineralized. But you'd have to go dig them up in order to find out. And I don't know anyone who wants to go grave robbing just to disprove creationists when there's already plenty of information out there that does that without having to desecrate grave sites.
I want to show you now a fossilized turtle. There's a fossilized turtle. And the evolutionists want you to believe that that happens over millions or thousands of years.
The specific time frame that the permineralization process takes depends entirely on the circumstances. If there are plenty of minerals in the local water and the organism is small, it can be a matter of a few hundred years. And yes, it can take millions of years as well. Amber in particular, which is not a fossilization process that relies on permineralization, actually does take millions of years. Resin from a tree must first harden into copal, which can be done relatively quickly, but the process that turns copal into amber is a very slow one and takes a few million years at least. So the fact that we have insects fossilized in amber means that either the Earth is a few million years old at least, or God planted them in the ground to make it look like the Earth is older than it really is.
I'm not really concerned about what the evolutionists teach you because it's wrong.
It sounds like you don't understand the evolutionary perspective well enough to explain what the evolutionist would teach you anyway, so I guess I should be happy that you're not going to even try.
I want to show you another picture now, which is a dinosaur called an ichthyosaur.
All right, pedants out there in the audience, unite. Let's say this in one voice. Ichthyosaurs are not dinosaurs. They lived at the same time as some of the dinosaurs, but they themselves are not dinosaurs.
Here's a fossilized ichthyosaur, and look at that very closely, because that ichthyosaur is giving birth to a baby ichthyosaur. In other words, that ichthyosaur, that dinosaur called an ichthyosaur, was fossilized in a moment, in a second of time.
No, that is not what that means at all. What it actually means is that it died while giving birth, and the baby died during that process too. It also means that they would have been buried relatively quickly after they died. The actual permineralization process could have taken hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, or yes, even millions of years, depending entirely on the circumstances. But one thing is certain, it was not instantaneous.
I want to show you another fossil, and this is a large fish actually swallowing another fish. In other words, this fish was having a meal of a little baby fish, but this particular fish was fossilized in a second.
No, it was not fossilized in a second. It was killed in a moment and buried soon after that. But here's the fun part. You're talking about fossils that are showing evidence of organisms going about their normal lives when suddenly they were killed and buried fairly quickly. And you think that points to a flood. What if I were to tell you that the sea creatures that are found on the top of Mount Everest also show signs of just going about their normal lives? Isn't the creationist explanation for the fossils on Everest that they got swept up there during the flood? Or are you another group that holds to the catastrophic tectonic activity during the flood that caused the mountains? Because that wouldn't really produce the fossils of creatures going about their normal lives on top of mountains either. And we have similar examples of entire ecosystems full of organisms just going about their normal business, all stacked on top of each other. How does that happen if all the fossils were made in one event?
So fossils happen instantaneously. They do not happen over thousands of years.
No, the death of the organism happens instantaneously. The permineralization process happens over time, hundreds of years at least. But yeah, it can happen as quickly as hundreds of years, I will grant that. Good thing nobody relies on how long the permineralization process takes in order to determine the age of the Earth.
Now, it's difficult for us to get hold of a dinosaur, but if you were to get hold of a horse or a cow or a pig and leave it in your back garden or anywhere you like, you can sit around for as long as you like, but I can guarantee you will not end up with a fossil.
Because that's not how fossils work, and nobody is claiming that it is.
You can do what you like with that cow or pig or horse or whatever you want, but there's only one way you're going to make a fossil out of it, and that is to dump tons, thousands and thousands of tons of stone and earth and water and mud on top of it.
I don't know exactly how much would be necessary, but yes, it needs to be buried before it decomposes. That's how this works. Nobody is hiding that. That's one of the first things you learn about fossilization on any website that you care to look at on the subject.
There is only one occasion in the history of this solar system when that happened, and that was at Noah's worldwide flood, which happened 4,400 years ago.
So there hasn't been a single mudslide or avalanche since Noah's flood? No local floods? Nothing? Never? Okay, if Noah's flood is the only event to ever have caused animals to become fossils, then why do we find bones with marks on them that indicate they were being scavenged before getting buried? Would a scavenger really be concerned about eating a dead animal if it were also in the process of dying in the same event that killed whatever it was eating?
So what actually happened at the flood 4,400 years ago? Well, we're told that the waters of the Great Deep broke up, and the waters under the earth came up and broke the surface of the earth into great chunks.
Okay, so you do hold to the idea that all of the tectonic activity that we see the clear evidence for all over the planet happened over the course of one single year during a flood in an event that would have been so catastrophic that it would have wiped out all life on the planet, whether it was in a little wooden boat or not. Okay, but really, I wish creationists would just stop trying to present stuff like this as if it can be harmonized with science. Just come to terms with the fact that magic would have had to have been involved, and admit it. Don't try to pretend that the geologic record shows clear evidence of this happening some 4,000 years ago. I have a lot more respect for people like Dr. John Baumgartner, who is a creationist geophysicist who has stated plainly that the tectonic activity that would have had to have happened during the flood is physically impossible and would have required miraculous intervention. At least he is willing to admit that the actual evidence does not point to Noah's flood unless you're willing to bend the laws of physics to get there. That is way more intellectually honest than your attempt to harmonize science with the biblical account.
And also that the water canopy over the earth came down in massive deluges of rain, which caused massive flooding, and not just flooding, but literally whole continents moving and engulfing huge numbers of living organisms of all types, fish, animals, birds, reptiles, everything you like, instantaneously.
Yes, it all happened instantaneously, but somehow ended up being perfectly sorted in a way that evolution would predict, but a single global flooding event would not. Why are the floating algae mats found exclusively in the lowest layers? Why are only simple marine creatures found in the next layers, with a gradual progression up through the layers? Why do you never find an Apatosaurus fossil outside of late Jurassic rock? Why are they never found next to Triceratops? Why are there never any fossils that go through multiple layers of rocks? Why do they all stick perfectly to their own strata? Except for trees, of course. For some reason, the only organisms that we find fossilized through multiple rock layers are the ones that can remain standing for hundreds of years after their death.
That's how fossils were formed, and fossils do not prove evolution. There's only one way you can make a fossil, and that's to compress it with tons and tons of something really heavy, as in Noah's flood.
No? Fossils are not formed by compression. At least, not the type that we've been talking about thus far. Carbonization is a process that does involve some heat and pressure, but that's the type of fossil that usually results in a thin imprint of carbon layer on a rock. Carbonized fossils are actually the ones where we can see things like feathers on a dinosaur and leaves on trees. But so far, you've shown such a lack of awareness about how any of this works that I'm not really expecting you to start distinguishing between the different fossilization processes, because then you'd actually have to learn something.
We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just remind you what the Bible actually says. Unless Jesus and Luke were both liars, this universe is 6,000 years old.
Okay, so assuming for argument's sake here that Jesus and Luke are both accurately represented in the Bible, and that the books attributed to Luke were actually written by Luke, just because I don't want to get distracted by authorship or authenticity at the moment, they don't have to be liars. There is another option here. They could have just been mistaken. We know of several instances in the past of people having been mistaken about various scientific ideas. We don't balance the humors anymore. The Earth isn't the center of the universe. Everything isn't made of 4 elements of water, air, earth, and fire. But we don't call the people that held those beliefs in the past liars. We call them mistaken. You don't advance scientific knowledge by hurling insults at the people who held on to mistaken ideas in the past. What's more, neither Luke nor Jesus ever wrote down an age for the Earth. Sure, they talked about the genealogies and whatnot as if they were accurate and made reference to their culture's creation myth, but there's nothing that makes it obvious that either of those things must be taken literally at face value. Your dichotomy here is stripping the Bible of its nuance, and it's people who take the Bible literally and insist on stripping it of nuance, like yourself, that have caused there to be a general opinion among atheist groups that there is nothing of value to be found in the Bible. Because if you look at it in a very overly simplistic, literal fashion, there really isn't much value there. But if you're willing to look at the cultural and historical context, there is quite a lot of beautiful historical literature that creationists often miss out on.
And I'll tell you why. In the end of Luke, from Luke 23 onwards, it gives the genealogy of Jesus Christ, 77 generations, which is roughly, that's from Adam to Jesus Christ, is roughly 4,000 years, roughly.
And depending on which source you're using for the Old Testament, whether it be the Greek Septuagint or the Hebrew Masoretic text, you get different numbers for the ages of the various people when they died and had kids and whatnot. And it's not an insignificant difference. Then there's also the fact that it was common practice in similar cultures that existed in similar times to inflate the ages of their patriarchs and kings, and using numerologically significant numbers when doing so. The Old Testament numbers are no exception. All of the ages are numbers that are significant in the Gematria, the Hebrew numerology system. I'm not going to go into it here, but there is an excellent case that can be made that all of the ages given in the genealogies are meant to be symbolic rather than literal. And I'd also like to remind my audience that Dr. Kent here accepts the Gematria as valid, as he demonstrated last time I covered them.
But they all have a numeric value. And in the Gematria, that's the numeric value of the words, there are 3 nouns: God, heaven, and earth.
So maybe instead of taking these ages as literal, he should be trying to find the meaning behind the numbers. I mean, if he does that, I'll be right on his heels to turn around and say numerology is bullshit, but at least it would be better than denying evolution based on genealogies in the Bible.
So when you present this to evolutionists, the first thing they're going to come up with is, carbon dating.
Nope. Anyone who knows anything about dating methods will most certainly not bring up carbon dating first. Maybe uranium series dating. Carbon dating certainly takes us back past when you think the entire universe began, so it does help establish that, but it doesn't get us to millions of years.
Carbon dating shows that there are all these fossils, they're billions of years old. Rubbish!
I agree. Rubbish. Nobody is carbon dating fossils to millions or billions of years old, because that's the wrong dating method for that job.
Did you hear me say that? I'll say it again. Rubbish!
And I'll say it with you. Rubbish. Whatever you're about to say is based on your rubbish understanding of the science.
Before the flood, there was a canopy over the earth full of water. It's in Genesis 1, verse 2, 3, 2. It's the second day.
Wait, are you a flat earther as well? I mean, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me at this point from what I've seen of you, but if you're not a flat earther, what do you mean it was over the earth? Was the entire earth surrounded by orbiting water? Was it ice, since it was so high up it would have been cold enough to be ice? Was it somehow miraculously just water still? Was it vapor? Was water vapor in the atmosphere? How did the orbital mechanics work? It would have had to have been part of the Earth's atmosphere, which would have been devastating to anything on the Earth. So today at sea level, air pressure is roughly 14.5 psi, meaning that 1 square inch of surface area, the air above that square inch, all the way up to space, weighs about 14.5 pounds. Sorry for the imperial units, but I'm letting other people do my math on this one, and those are the units that they used. Now, in order for there to have been enough water to have covered the Earth up to Mount Ararat, it would have had to have been another 9 kilometers of water. Since 10 meters of water is roughly equivalent to 1 atmosphere, the pressure with this added water would have been 900 atmospheres, or 13,000 psi. For reference, a pressure cooker increases the pressure by about 15 psi. So anything living on the Earth pre-flood gets pressure cooked, even if we drastically underestimate how much water was necessary. After all, you did mention the fountains of the deep. Maybe 2/3 of the water for the flood came from the fountains of the deep. I mean, that has other issues, but we'll ignore that for now. So now the pre-flood atmospheric pressure is a measly 4,300 psi. So it's still pressure cooking everything. Now, I'm skipping the rest of the carbon dating bit because all he does is say it's garbage because radiation from the sun wouldn't be able to get through the water canopy. And you know what? He's right. The fact that we have carbon dates for items that are older than 4,000 years that match up with the dendrochronological record of the amount of carbon in the atmosphere at the time and the ratios of carbon-14 and carbon-12 completely destroys the idea of a flood and a water canopy. And he never addresses any of it, just says that the carbon-14 wouldn't have been in the air while there was a water canopy, therefore carbon dating is rubbish. And of course he equates carbon dating with any other radiometric dating method, so he talks about carbon dating dinosaur fossils, and no, that's not how we date those. We use independent dating methods for those.
Science proves God's word, and not the other way around, because we do know that. We know that everything that God says, we now, through science, are discovering why he said those. So the laws of hygiene, laws of health, laws of diet. God told us to do this and not do that, and now we know why.
Yeah.
So did we ever learn why you're supposed to sprinkle the blood of a freshly killed bird over someone who had leprosy? Or not wear clothes of mixed fabric? And what's up with the whole breed them in front of striped poplar branches thing? You know, the one where Jacob tricked a guy out of the best of his flock by agreeing with him that his wages for tending the flock would be any of the speckled or spotted goats, and then proceeded to always make the best of the flock breed in front of the striped poplar and almond branches, so that they would have speckled and spotted offspring, and the weak ones he would allow to breed normally so that they would have single-colored offspring. How does that work scientifically? I'd really like to know. Now, I'm skipping a bit, and I can't emphasize this enough, but the part that I'm skipping here is them explaining how most people in Darwin's time didn't travel more than 6 miles from their birthplace, so when this guy who had traveled all around the world came back and told them about evolution, they were more likely to believe him because of how much more traveling he had done. Like, they take ages to say it, but that is literally one of the arguments they make. I can't. I can't do it. I can't.
And he later used his work on finches and in fairness, other things as well, to talk about his theory of evolution.
Yes, he did use his observations about finches, and many other things as well, to talk about evolution. Yep, I can't disagree with that.
Now, I want to describe to you exactly what Charles Darwin did actually find. He actually found, when he got to the Galapagos Islands, he found 13 different varieties of finches, And here they are. You can see these picture of these 13 different varieties of finches. Quite small, plump birds, but actually they got a variation in length and breadth of beak, according to what they actually eat.
Yes. And as far as I'm aware, creationists actually agree with this one. The finches all would have shared a common ancestor and then adapted to their individual environments as their populations spread out.
If they're looking for little bugs, insects underneath the barks, then obviously long beaks are more suitable. If they're crunching up nuts, then shorter, stronger beaks are more suitable.
You heard it here first, folks. Stronger beaks are more suitable for crunching up D's nuts.
So what he decided is that there was, in his mind, there was a sort of primitive finch, and that all of these other designs of bird beaks, in other words, the breadth and the length of the beaks, came as a result of evolution.
Is that not also your view? Do you not hold that there was one pair of birds that came off the ark that was the ancestor of modern finches, and that they all would have adapted or micro-evolved to suit their climate? Isn't this supposed to be one of those things that we all agree on?
Now, I don't think you would get away with that nowadays, because actually he did not see evolution.
No, we most definitely would get away with that nowadays, because not only did he see the direct results of evolution, but we have since watched a new species of finch evolve on the islands in just 2 generations. It was accomplished through hybridization. One male found itself on the wrong island, but was able to successfully mate with 2 females on that island. Its offspring found themselves completely unable to mate with the locals, but able to mate with each other, and now we have a new species of finch that is reproductively isolated from both of its ancestral species, and has different physical characteristics from both.
True evolution is one species or kind of animals, as described in the book of Genesis, changing into another kind of animal.
And creationists purposely keep the definition of the word kind very vague so that they can wiggle out of any observed speciation event with the proclamation that it's still the same kind. Sometimes kind includes a whole massive diverse group of organisms. The E. coli developed the ability to metabolize citrate, but it's still bacteria kind. Sometimes it's more specific. Dogs always produce dogs, and bunnies always produce bunnies. And, that same old stuff. Depending on who you ask, and even when you ask them, sometimes all fish are one kind. Other times there are different kinds of fish. All birds are one kind, and sometimes there are different kinds of birds. In other words, the word kind is completely useless unless we get a definition nailed down, which shouldn't be too hard if immutable created kinds were really a thing. But it is necessarily difficult precisely because there are no immutable created kinds. And that's where I'm going to leave it. He doesn't say anything particularly important after that, but he does once again display his incredible ignorance on the subject of evolution by stating that if Darwin had observed finches evolving, then we should see dogs turning into cats. So that was fun. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Ken Christensen, who says, "How am I borrowing from Christianity? I think it's perfectly moral for a man to love another man. I think it is immoral to kill witches or disobedient children. I think it was wrong to kill the Amalekites to steal their land. What am I borrowing from Christianity?" Exactly. If God is in possession of the perfect moral code and has communicated it to us through the Bible and written it on all our hearts, then surely the rules that God laid out in the Bible should match up with our internal moral codes, right? So why do they so often differ from the things written in the Bible? Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my patrons, who are the canned beans that keep me farting while social distancing. If you'd like to keep me farting but far, far away, you can become a patron at patreon.com/ViceRhino or donate through my PayPal link in the description. And today we have our first patron at the Responsible Adult Rhinos patron tier, Mark McManus. Mark here is a frontline healthcare worker, so thank you so much for doing what you can to keep everyone safe and healthy. See you next time.